Hello, friends. We are gearing up for our annual No Small Endeavor live Thanksgiving show on November 24 at the beautiful Skirmerhorn Symphony Center in Nashville, Tennessee. If you've never been, these shows honor our roots as a live variety show, and let me tell you, we pull out all the stops. World-class musicians, interview guests, descend on Nashville for a night of music, conversation, and storytelling that you do not want to miss. Last year, for example, we were joined by Malcolm Gladwell, Vince Gill, Brian Sutton, and a stage full of musicians and performers. Now look, here's the deal. If you want access to an exclusive pre-sale for this year's show at the Skirmerhorn, hurry over to sign up for NSC Plus, our bonus community, for just $5 a month. Last year, No Small Endeavor at the Skirmerhorn sold out, so don't miss the chance to grab your tickets early. The pre-sale begins September 13. We want to see you at the show, so go to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus today. Again, go today to nosmallendeavor.com and click Join NSC Plus. See you soon. No Small Endeavor is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? With Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate, then their tool will provide options from other companies so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at Progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. I'm Lee C. Camp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
The planet is warming, and weather is just getting really weird and erratic, and all these things that didn't used to happen are happening.
That's climate scientist Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. She notes that climate science often presents to the public a coming spectacle of apocalyptic doom and gloom. But that approach, she says, may facilitate detachment in the face of a seemingly impossible task.
For too long, the environmental movement has offered us all a very generic list of things we should all do. Vote, protest, donate, spread the word, lower your carbon footprint. But for a lot of people, it doesn't really do it.
Today, a different way to talk about climate action from Ayana's new book entitled, What If We Get It Right?
This is the work of our lifetime, so why don't we find ways to make it delightful?
All coming right up. This episode is sponsored by Lumen. You may have already heard me speak of Lumen, the world's first handheld metabolic coach, which measures your metabolism simply through your breath. Then the app gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, even stress management. And I've been using it for weeks now, and I have found it simply fascinating, teaching me things about myself that I did not know. It's simple to use. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism. Our metabolism, I'm learning, is at the center of everything the body does, and optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy results, better fitness results, better sleep, and so forth. So, if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/endeavor to get 15% off your Lumen. That is lumen.me/endeavor for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. I'm Lee C. Camp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life. Polar ice caps melting, massive superstorms, mass extinction of species. This is the very real and terrifying fire and brimstone, doom and gloom that comes along with two words: climate change. And to be fair, it is scary, but our guest today is a climate scientist whose work is centered in two different words. Theological words, I might be inclined to say: love and joy. Dr. Ayana Johnson invites us into biophilia, the love of nature and all its miraculous diversity, abundance, and resilience. In this refreshing conversation, she offers us a different framework for thinking about what happens next on this planet. She poses the question, what if we get it right? What would that look like? Through the lens of interconnectedness, not just of nature, but of all things, she offers us a simple tool to figure out what our real climate action can be as individuals and groups. Climate action that does not simply engender despair and resentment, but rather climate action rooted in biophilia, steeped in the compelling and restorative vision of love and joy. So today, our conversation with Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson is a scientist, policy expert, writer, and teacher. She co-founded and leads the Urban Ocean Lab, a think tank for the future of coastal cities, and is the Rue Distinguished Scholar at Bowdoin College. Ayana is the co-creator and co-host of the Spotify Gimlet podcast, How to Save a Planet. She earned her BA in Environmental Science and Public Policy from Harvard and a PhD in Marine Biology from Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Today, we're discussing her new book, What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures. Welcome, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you for having me.
Very grateful to have you with us today. The last line in your bio that I omitted reads, above all, Ayana is in love with climate solutions. And so before we start talking about the climate solutions part, I want to point to just the prelude of your book that rings off of that, that's entitled An Ocean Love Story. And so you're starting with a place that we typically don't expect climate scientists to take us. It's sort of a notion of love. So unpack some of that hopefulness of love that you're bringing to your work.
Sure. I mean, the first chapter of the book, this prelude, is about my origin story, essentially. It's the only chapter of the book that's really autobiographical or memoir, because I just felt like if someone's going to trust me as their guide through the next few hundred pages talking about climate solutions, putting things in perspective, the reader, the listener deserves to know the perspective that I'm bringing to this curation, right? This is a book of 20 interviews and essays and original commissioned art and some poetry. So really this opening chapter was my attempt to say, like, here's who I am. I'm going to be your guide. So let me introduce myself properly. I've no interest in writing an autobiography, but I was like, some context might be helpful. And the context that I found myself most wanting to offer was all of this really comes from this place of biophilia, of loving nature, of loving life on this planet, of being just gobsmacked by biodiversity and shooting stars and ants and rainforests and coral reefs and all of it. And so I wanted to make sure that people knew they were reading a book put together by a nature-loving dork. And that's the bias that I'm really bringing to this, is one of caring about people, yes, but also caring about very deeply about the rest of life on this planet and wanting to be a part of not only a human community, but of an ecosystem, and thinking about what if we get it right in that context and with that mindset.
So as we'll have most of our time together to discuss, your book is not about doom and gloom. You're looking for hopefulness and about solutions. But I think you start in a helpful place for those who have not yet really considered very seriously the fact, I'll use the euphemism for the way you put in the book, the fact that we're screwed. You know, there's a real fact that we're screwed, right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about, maybe for those who, as I said, haven't yet sufficiently considered the facts of where things are headed, what would be kind of some of your top 5 or 10 things you would point to of just saying we need to be paying attention to this is what's coming at us?
Yeah. Most of us who are in touch with nature and our body's reactions to it know that it's getting hotter, right? The planet is warming and weather is just getting really weird and erratic, and all these things that didn't used to happen, at least not with this frequency or this magnitude, are happening. The ice is melting, the sea levels are rising, the air is heating up, storms are getting more intense, their patterns are changing. We're experiencing drought and flood and wildfire, and all of these extremes are becoming so common that they're shifting what extreme even means. One of the things for me that really struck home was when the water in Florida got hotter than 100 degrees last summer. That's literally hot tub temperatures. That's a jacuzzi.
That's mind-boggling.
That's the place I learned how to swim. That's the place where I decided to become a marine biologist and to think about all those species just sort of frying in place. Corals can't just leave when it gets hot. The reefs are turning white. The fish are losing their homes. The corals are crumbling. It's a completely different ecosystem than it was when I learned how to swim and when I snorkeled for the first time. And just like humans, all of these species are evolved to live within a pretty narrow temperature range, right? We run a fever. If our body temperature is 101 degrees, if it's just a few degrees hotter than 98, we have like a meltdown. That's happening to like life in general on this planet. It doesn't sound like a lot to warm by a few degrees, but it's like nature's running a fever. And so that's kind of what I keep coming back to as like, we need to cool off this fever.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So the posture of your book is, as you kind of indicated at the beginning, you're quite aware of the ways in which kind of depictions of the coming apocalyptic demise doesn't do a lot to cultivate constructive change. And if anything, it kind of perhaps cultivates a sort of passiveness because of a sense of overload or the impossibility of making constructive change, I think. And so you're kind of pointing us toward some sort of hope and possibility for transformation. And the whole title of your book, What If We Get It Right? So talk to us a little bit about that posture of the book with the title, What If We Get It Right?
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing about the title is that there's a question mark at the end of it, right? It's a very open question. The book is not titled, We Will Get It Right, or When We Get It Right, or even This Is How We Get It Right. It's an invitation, really, the title, inviting us to imagine what that world would look like if we did charge ahead with all the climate solutions that we have at our fingertips, which are basically all we need, right? We already know how to electrify transportation, how to farm in a way that heals ecosystems and brings health back to ourselves. We already know how to green buildings. We know how to compost. We know how to put up solar panels and wind turbines. We know how to protect and restore ecosystems. We know how to replant trees and wetlands and mangroves. We know how to create protected areas and parks, right? There's not a lot of mystery here. We don't need to wait for technology to miraculously come up with something. We don't need to wait for fusion energy to exist. We can do all this right now. And so for me, this what if we get it right question is really like, how do we unlock a much faster transformation? How do we shift society, culture, politics, the status quo in order to just move a lot faster on this stuff? Because from where I'm sitting, we could get a much better world. Like, it's not that the world right now is perfect and it's something we need to hold on to for dear life, right? We're experiencing all these negative effects of climate change, but also just other things that are broken, right? Whether that's thinking about our democracy and making sure everyone has the right to vote and every vote is equally counted, which has big effects on whether or not we get climate policy, for example, because the majority of Americans would like our government to be doing more on climate, but the way our government is set up, that's not the outcome that we get, right? There's huge inequality in this country in terms of income and access to healthcare, et cetera. All of these things are big what ifs that are the context within which we're trying to deal with climate change and really impact that. And that's the status quo we're dealing with, is a lot of pollution and toxins, not great health system, not a terribly great school system, right? Not a great political system. And within that framework, we have to transform everything about the way we live on this planet. And so when I think about what if we get it right, it's not a technology question. It's a how can we be better humans question. How can we come together and each find our roles in making this transformation that we need to sort of like acknowledge the current status quo is really not working for very many people, and think about how we build a climate future that's like a world we want to live in, a place where we can actually thrive. And I feel like imagination is one of the things we most need right now. I would really like Hollywood to become more involved in telling stories about climate, not more documentaries, but more stories that just help us see what the world looks like if we implement all these climate solutions. Because I think part of the challenge is people don't want to race towards this future that's just this big blank unknown. And so while we have all of this media showing us what the bad version of the future looks like, right? We've got like a pretty clear vision of the apocalypse. We don't actually have a lot of visions of, yeah, like what's the good thing? Like what should I work towards? How can I be motivated, not just by running away from the bad stuff, but having something to run towards? I really think it's a time for artists, filmmakers, storytellers, musicians to help us to paint that in all of its multicolored glory and help us like get a more tangible sense of what we want to create together so we can get excited about rolling up our sleeves and putting in the effort that's going to take, because like there's a lot of work we need to do. And that can be really hard to be motivated. We're just like, oh, it's going to be apocalypse anyway. Like, why bother?
Yeah. You have two beautiful quotes, one from Arundhati Roy. What lies ahead? Reimagining the world. Only that. And then from Angela Davis, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
I couldn't put it any better than them. So I just put those quotes right on their own separate pages in the book for people to appreciate.
If you'll allow me to geek out for a minute. So in Christian theology, this would be called a proleptic ethic. So proleptic being a grammatical form in which you speak of what is to come. You're so sure that it's to come that you speak of it in the present tense. And so this sort of notion of having this fertile imagination of what the world is going to be or can be, and then you act on that in the present. And then, of course, I think your thing about imagination as well is really helpful, because in too much of my experience, I find too many religious folks who don't have a sufficient imagination for this earth. And they kind of have this kind of escapist vision, so that as if this earth doesn't matter, which is deeply troubling to me, and I would imagine deeply troubling to you. But I don't know, any commentary on that, the proleptic piece, or imagine further things on the imagination, or the ways our big stories fuel this?
I really appreciate sort of like the theological grammar of it, right? Just speaking it into being, the sort of investment in the story such that you are making it real. And I think there's definitely a need for that when we think about the future of life on Earth, right? And one of my favorite aspects of this merging of Christianity and climate action is this concept of creation care, that it's less about dominion, although there's different, sort of like etymologies of that word, which would make it less about exerting power and control over, but more about coming into alignment with this idea of creation care. Like, what do we as humans owe to these other magnificent species that we're sharing the planet with? Like, wouldn't it be awful to destroy God's creation? Like, who are we to do that? Like, this magnificent biodiversity of life. And so I think there's a lot of really beautiful work happening in different communities, religious communities, that are like, no, it's our job to care for, maintain, nurture, protect nature and all these species. And if they go extinct on our watch, that is a disrespect to the Creator. But to go back to this concept of the speaking about the future in the present tense, I'm not there yet. But I'm definitely at the phase where I feel comfortable dreaming about it, and then thinking about what can I do to help reel these dreams closer to reality. And so the question becomes for me, like, who do I need to team up with? Like, how can we collaborate? No one can do this alone. It all ends up being like join something. So what are the things that each of us are joining and contributing our skills, our expertise, our resources to make it successful, make this transformation more rapid, etc. And so I think for people for whom their religious community is paramount, I think and wish that there could be more engagement within those spaces. But this idea of creation care, I just find so captivating, because why wouldn't we care for creation? It's such like an obvious and simple thing to do. When we think about the opposite of that is throwing nature completely out of balance to the detriment of everything. And it's just rude and it's selfish and it's not aligned with any of the values that we hold dear.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. I love hearing from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. A shout out today to Wendell Willis, Adam Grant, Joni Burnell, Anna Funk, and Joe Scutella, all for such helpful correspondence and feedback here of late. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in this episode, as well as a PDF of my complete interview notes and a full transcript. We also have a free bi-monthly newsletter in which I riff on themes and behind-the-scenes goings-on called the NSC Notebook. You can subscribe to that newsletter for free by going to our website at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. We would love for you to join us over there if you haven't signed up. It's where I get to speak my mind sometimes. A little more forthrightly, perhaps, than the podcast or public radio broadcast allows. Coming up, why the web of life on Earth is more delicate than we might suppose, what climate activism often misses by being so focused on big problems and big solutions, and how small acts of hope and joy might contribute to changing the tide in climate work.
Everyone has some version of a daily practice, but what can we learn from one another to cultivate more meaning and growth in our own lives? I'm Simranjeet Singh. Join me as I dive into life's greatest questions with thought leaders, artists, philosophers, and more to learn from their unique practices and insights. Life is hard, but it doesn't have to be this hard. Wisdom in Practice launches August 15th. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
So you started pointing us to the next topic that I wanted to raise, and that is the way interconnectedness of all things seems to be important to you. So you pointing us to this very holistic account of understanding both the problems and the solutions. And you say at one point, this book is about possibility and transformation. It's about what the world could be if we charge ahead with the array of climate solutions we have at our fingertips, solutions at the intersection of science, policy, culture, and justice. And so there's kind of two pieces of interconnectedness I want to discuss here. And the first one is, talk to us more about the interconnectedness of, I think you used the phrase, the web of life. For those who are not familiar with this very concept itself, how would you kind of help someone get a glimpse of the awe of the interconnectedness of the web of life?
This is like a really weird answer, but do you know that Weezer song that goes, if you want to destroy my sweater, whoa, 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 pull this thread as I walk away, as I walk away. No, do you know this song?
Yes.
Watch me unravel, I'll soon be naked, right? And so it's like this, you pull on this one thread and it could all just fall apart. On the other hand, we could mend things. And this is one of the words that I'm obsessed with these days, is this idea of mending. Like we actually can not just fix, but the word mend seems to hold to me some heartfelt aspect of like caring enough about whether it's a sweater or a blender or whatever it is that we are putting effort into repair, whether it's our gardens or transforming our lawns into native plants that can be a home for many more species, right? This idea that we actually have to care for the insects at the bottom of the food web, right? Making sure that they have enough food and they're not being poisoned by glyphosate and Roundup and whatever other pesticides we're being told we need to spray on our gardens, that we don't have any weeds in them. And often the weeds are these beautiful flowers. What I kind of wish that we had a bit more of was humility about our place in all of it. Because I think we've been tricked into thinking that we can kind of live on top of nature, especially in cities and in all these places where it's just so much concrete. We're living on top of nature as opposed to not even just with nature, which is a phrase that we hear a lot, that we want to live with nature, but within nature, I would say. Thinking of ourselves as one of 8 million or more species on this planet, and just having a respect for other forms of life. And I just wish we could appreciate this web of life, that we are all connected in this way, that we pull a thread and ooh, something's going to happen. And in a lot of cases, what we're doing to this planet is pulling threads that we don't even really understand what they're attached to, right? Like when you melt the sea ice at the North Pole, I was just in the Arctic for the last 2 weeks, and the boat had to go so much further north to find pack ice than they have in the past. And it's projected that within a decade, we could have no pack ice in the Arctic in the summer.
Wow.
That is a completely different ecosystem. And those poles with all their ice that are so white, that reflects all this sunlight back, that actually is part of this air conditioner of the planet. And when that ice melts and the dark water is there and that is absorbing the heat instead of reflecting it, right? That's changing the heat patterns at the poles, which are changing everything. And the ice is melting and the water is getting less salty, and the salinity is what drives those currents. Those temperature gradients and salinity gradients are driving these massive ocean basin-wide currents. And so it's not just sea level rise, it's all of these things mixed together that are really fundamentally changing our Earth system in ways that we don't necessarily always connect those dots. And so when I speak about the web of life, it's those kinds of ripple effects, right? So when my hometown of Brooklyn is flooded because of a foot of sea level rise that could be here within the next few decades, and on top of that foot, you have then high tides and you have storms, right? So it really becomes a much bigger deal than that. We're talking about millions of people having to move away from our coastlines because they're just not safe places to live anymore. And so this is this big transformation, this ripple effect that's happening because of the burning of fossil fuels, because we're trapping all of this greenhouse gases that are warming the planet, like this blanket over the planet, and the heat can't escape. And so we're cooking, but we could turn this around. It's going to take a long time for that ice to refreeze. So we got to do everything we can to really prevent the warming that's leading to the melting. And I think that's the trick, is that the book title is What If We Get It Right? ? But sometimes I think a more honest title would be What If We Get It As Right as Possible? Because so many things have already changed that we're not going to get some dream pristine world of back when there were, a few million people on the planet. The world has changed so much. So acknowledging that reality, I'm not naive about this stuff, right? I'm a scientist. I've read the papers. I've seen the graphs. This is not looking good, but we have a huge range of possible futures. And each of us gets some say in which of those futures we'll get. And so if we expand to the less catchy version of the title, perhaps what if we get it as right as possible? Those increments actually really matter. We're so often dissuaded from caring about incremental progress, and instead being obsessed with radical change, which we do need radical change to get off of fossil fuels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think this idea that if we don't keep warming to a certain number, then we've failed and we should just give up, because the difference between 2 degrees of warming Fahrenheit and 5 degrees of warming Fahrenheit is a completely different planet. And so really every 1/10 of a degree really matters.
One thing that strikes me about what you just said is that while we must take seriously things like policy and leaders, you're also taking the approach of saying, as you just said, don't take for granted the grave importance of the increments of constructive change that all of us can participate in.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of my biggest takeaways from having spent the last 2 years thinking about this question is that how to communicate about climate change, there's no one way. Some people will actually be motivated by the scary apocalyptic projections because they're like, oh God, that's bad. We should avoid that. But for a lot of people, it doesn't really do it. And so I don't think there's any one way to communicate about it. And I think if some people are like, what are the small things I can do to add up to something bigger? Great. If someone's like, I'm going to tackle this one big thing, great. I think we need to think about the changes that we can make in different aspects of our lives and get really clear about like where we have influence and power. And everyone has influence and power. It just looks different for each person, right? Your sphere of influence in the people who are listening to your podcast, in radio show, in your family, in your neighborhood, in your church, in your sports team, in your book club, whatever. Like everyone has all of these places where they have standing, where they have membership, an authentic place from which to share their concerns and ideas. And people have different resources, whether that's money or popularity or the ability to make things cool or, skills for video or planning parties or gardening or writing. Like we need all of it. The invitation is to find their own specific roles. I think for too long, the environmental movement has offered us all a very generic list of things we should all do. Vote, protest, donate, spread the word, lower your carbon footprint. And I do all of those things. I agree that those are good things to do, and they will manifest in different ways for different people. But I do think it's a big miss if we're not also talking about the specific things that only you can do, that I could never do and shouldn't try to do necessarily, right? So we need to do these personal things to live more lightly on the planet, but then also think about our influence in our professional sphere. So within our professional lives, whatever your job is, there's a way, I think, to use that for climate solutions. And I would just encourage people to get really creative about their professional influence. Or is it like your 401k? You wish that there was a climate friendly fund you could choose to have your retirement invested in. Because right now, for a lot of people, their retirement savings is their biggest carbon footprint, because a lot of that money is being invested in continued extraction of fossil fuels. We send it to some big pension fund, and they're investing in all this stuff that doesn't really align with our values. And so I've personally moved my savings into a climate-friendly, fossil-free fund. And there's lots more of those available now just in the last few years. Most of the major retirement and 401k kinds of things have a green option. And so that can actually be the most influential change people make. The statistic is if you have $125,000 saved, that has a bigger negative impact on the planet than all of the good you could possibly do with your eating plants and riding your bike and all that other stuff. Like it really matters what we are investing in with our dollars. So I would encourage people to think about that. So beyond the personal and the professional, there's also the political. Because as citizens, as voters, we have a lot of influence. And it's not just in who we elect as president, although that definitely matters, having a president who is on board with doing things that are climate solutions and taking care of the planet and restoring it. But this is all up and down the ballot, right? It matters for city council. That's where it's determined. Things like local composting, is that available to you? Bike lanes, thinking about mayor's offices and public transit budget decisions and all of that kind of thing. Public utility commissions and our electric suppliers, are they starting this transition to renewables? So all of these are things that our local elected officials have power over. So it really matters that we're paying attention to people in those positions and using our voice as citizens, not just when we vote, but to call when there's a bill up for debate or we're really concerned about how the budget is being allocated, locally or we're dealing with the impacts of extreme weather, and make sure that these folks who are there to represent us and protect us know what our concerns are, because mostly politicians do not hear from people at all. And so actually calling or emailing their offices does get noticed because so few people do it. And so I think people underestimate the power of their voice as citizens all the time.
You have a suggestion that we think about our own kind of personal climate agenda, if you will, in the terms of a Venn diagram, the circle of what brings you joy, what are you good at, and what work needs doing, and kind of the overlap of those three. And I find that a helpful kind of invitation again, and especially taking seriously our own giftedness and, as you said, sphere of influence and power, as well as joy. And again, it goes back to love at the top, right? This notion of love and joy at work in all of this. What do you think engendered in you wanting to take this approach of saying, let's take joy seriously as something in this pursuit?
For me, it was a reaction to not seeing enough of it, right? We have 3 generations of people who have now been working on climate. And all these people who are just working so hard, so serious all the time. And a lot of people burning out because we can't actually just bang our head against the wall trying to make change for our whole lifetime. We'll be miserable and we'll have a really bad headache. So it's interesting. People are always like, you're so hopeful. You're so optimistic. And I'm actually not. I'm a realist. I'm like very in touch with the possibility that things don't go well, but like also what if we get it right? You know, this sense of possibility is what drives me. And so finding ways to bring joy into this work, I realize that what people, when they think of me as hopeful or optimistic, what they really are seeing that is that I'm joyful. Because we just have to do this stuff. Like, this is the work of our lifetime. So why don't we find ways to make it delightful? And a big part of that for me is including more art and music in my work and being really deliberate about who I collaborate with. Because we all know that if you're like working with jerks, even the best project becomes miserable. So
yes.
I think a lot about like, who's the crew I want to roll with as I commit. Also, it's ice cream. If we can't make that fun, I mean, we've really lost the plot.
Indeed.
Just to describe this super concretely, I think this climate action Venn diagram of what are you good at, what needs doing, and what brings you joy. The answer will be different for everyone, and that's totally fine. And actually, that's the exciting part. Like, we each get to lean into our superpowers and contribute what we're best at as part of this. And it has to be through joining something, through collaboration. This is not about like going off into your corner by yourself or starting a new nonprofit. For the love of God, like, please, that is not the answer. But how can we like transform something? How can we accelerate other efforts? And I think that's really exciting and gratifying work. And maybe more than like what brings you joy, it should be what brings you satisfaction, right? Because we're not all going to be skipping and giggling all the time about climate work or any work. Like, I spend a lot of time writing emails and scheduling meetings, and like, that is not delightful all the time. But the satisfaction that comes with doing something that's gratifying, that's meaningful, that's worth the effort and the occasional boring stuff that just needs to get done, that's the place where I hope more and more of us can get to.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our episode with climate scientist Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. We're going to take a short break, but coming right up, a host of small, practical ways of moving toward hopeful climate futures, and why such acts actually help us to flourish in all the ways we want to. Hey there! Did you know that we have a newsletter? Just imagine if you could have one of your favorite ethics professors send you a list of things to reflect on, think about, practical actions with which to experiment, all on your way to sorting through what it might mean to live a good life. Well, that is the NSC Notebook. I riff on themes and topics related to the show and our guests. Sign up for my NSC notebook today at nosmallendeavor.com/newsletter. You talk about quite a number of areas of work and solutions in the book that kind of lay out the chapter structure of the book. Allow me to kind of raise one of these, and then you kind of give us quickly, to fuel people's imagination, what are some things that could be done? Because you're talking about the fact that we have a lot of solutions at hand, but you're calling us for more rapid implementation of these and to do what we already can do. So just in terms of ecosystems, food systems, forestry, rural communities, what would you point to as kind of some of the possibilities there?
Some of the things that I'm really excited about are the fact that protecting and restoring ecosystems could provide 37% of the carbon dioxide mitigation that's needed to stabilize warming below 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees Celsius by 2030. So nature is almost 40% of the solution when it comes to carbon dioxide rebalancing. That's just so much potential, right? Like, that's really exciting. We can look to nature for the answers. It's not all AI and algorithms that are going to get us there. It's not robots, it's photosynthesis in large part.
And what would some of that look like in ecosystems that would contribute to that kind of share of potential healing?
I think about it as two parts: protect and restore. So we need to be protecting these ecosystems that already exist, that are still intact, whether that's wetlands or mangroves or seagrasses that can absorb like 5 times more carbon per acre than a tropical rainforest, for example. There's not that much of them, but they're important ecosystems that are helping to stabilize shorelines and reduce the impacts of flooding and storms, etc. So there are multiple benefits to protecting and restoring nature besides the greenhouse gas rebalancing. So there's the protect side and there's the restore side. So we actually can replant things. We can replant mangroves. We can restore wetlands. We can plant trees. We can heal forests. We can heal nature. We can help it recover and rebound. And I think that's one of the magical things that I get so excited about is the resilience of nature. That if we just give it some room to breathe, it really can come back. But at this point, some of these ecosystems really need a nudge. They need some literal seeds in the ground, some seedlings to help that transition.
Let me go to the next section on cities and infrastructure, art and technology, and even talking about urban design. What are kind of some keys there that you would want us to pay attention to?
This was one of the craziest things I learned when researching this book, that about 75% of the infrastructure that will be in place in 2050 has yet to be built.
Wow.
We are literally transforming and reshaping the world all the time. Every infrastructure project, every building, we don't normally see it added up like that. But we have, over the next 25 years, we will be remaking this world. And we have the chance to do that in any number of different ways. And we can do that in a way that helps us get to live on this planet longer and healthier.
Are there things on urban design or things that stuck out to you that you might draw our attention to?
So one of the things that I'm obsessed with is trains. I feel like there's been so much attention on the shift to electric vehicles from gasoline cars, internal combustion. We just got to stop lighting stuff on fire. But I think this push towards electric vehicles, I have one. I'm for vehicles being electric. But if the result of people waking up to the climate crisis is that we all just go buy an electric car, that's not going to solve the problem, really, right? But what we need, especially people, it'll just cause a huge traffic jam in cities where people don't all have cars. We need to improve public transit. We need to find out better ways to get from here to there, because even if everything runs on renewable energy, it still takes a lot of resources to make energy. And so energy efficiency and conservation will always really matter. And so I think a lot about public transit, but for people who aren't in cities, I think a lot about high-speed rail, which America has just really not gotten it together on. I keep coming back to is that high-speed rail is 3 times faster and 4 times more energy efficient than driving, and nearly 9 times more energy efficient than flying, and can reduce emissions by up to 90% when powered by electricity. So it's just this missed opportunity to like hang out in the cafe car while you're speeding around the country, like reading your book instead of like yelling at traffic.
Yeah.
I think that's what we miss about a lot of these climate solutions is just like a better quality of life, right?
You've alluded to this, but we haven't talked about it yet. And that is the importance of culture and art and storytelling. You mentioned poetry and music, filmmaking. Why do you see this as so important in this work?
It's culture that tells us what's okay and what's not. It's culture that is helping us align our moral compass. It's culture that helps us look around and see, like, what does it mean to be cool? It's culture that is right now so focused on consumerism, individualism, all these things, which I think are deeply problematic for getting it together as a collective to address this crisis that we're facing. And so what I would really love to see is culture starting to lead this transition in a different way. Because right now, for example, only 2.8% of scripted film and TV in the US in recent years is mentioning climate change terms, right? Less than 1% mention the term climate change. And so a lot of people just aren't really seeing, not even examples of a better world, but just like aren't really engaging with this reality that the climate is changing and is going to continue to change in ways that are not beneficial to us. It's actually still quite easy to ignore that if you're tuned into popular culture. So that section of the book is called Culture is the Context, because it really is the context for all the decisions we make, for all the trends that are happening actually really shape our economy and demand for different products, et cetera. Like we could be voting essentially with our dollars for the future that we want, but we're not really getting the information or inspiration that we need from all the people who are shaping culture. So, and there's polling that says people would love to hear more from the celebrities, musicians they follow about what they're doing and what we can all do to be part of the solutions. Like people are looking for that cultural leadership and are not really finding as much of it as they would like. So I hope that more and more people will become more comfortable with speaking up on these things. The last thing I'll say on that is that we know that in the statistic is in developed countries, 80% of people say they are willing to adjust their lifestyles to reduce the effects of climate change. In the US, 62% of adults say they feel a personal sense of responsibility to help reduce global warming, but 51% say they don't know where to start. And so that's where culture can come in and bridge that gap between people who care, which is the vast majority of Americans and people all over the world, and people who have actually found their role or their sweet spot in their Venn diagram for being a part of solutions and being a part of something. Feeling like your efforts are going towards something that matter just feels good. I mean, that's sort of the secret. Like, even if we don't get it right, I will have lived a much more rewarding life for having tried to get it right. I will be a happier, more fulfilled person for having tilted at these windmills. Just maybe we need a new analogy because windmills shouldn't be tilted at anymore. Right? We should be like hugging them.
Ayana shares in her book a poem by author, poet, philosopher, farmer, and Kentuckian Wendell Berry. We wrote Mr. Berry a typewritten letter to ask for his permission to use this poem in this episode. Promptly 3 days later, after we had put that letter in the mailbox, we received a handwritten note granting us permission, while simultaneously declining our request for an interview, simply saying, "No, I don't give interviews." Similarly, I had written Wendell some years back asking if he'd come to Nashville to appear on one of our live shows. He replied with his own manually typewritten note, thanking me for the invitation, but declining, simply saying, "If I were there, I wouldn't be here." Perhaps that's something like his version of his climate Venn diagram. But in any case, here's Ayana's reading of Wendell Berry's A Vision.
If we will have the wisdom to survive, to stand like slow-growing trees on a ruined place, renewing, enriching it, if we will make our seasons welcome here, asking not too much of earth or heaven, then a long time after we are dead, the lives our lives prepare will live here, their houses strongly placed upon the valley sides, fields and gardens rich in the windows. The river will run clear as we will never know it, and over it birdsong like a canopy. On the levels of the hills will be green meadows, stock bells in noon shade. On the steeps where greed and ignorance cut down the old forest, an old forest will stand, its rich leaf fall drifting on its roots. The veins of forgotten springs will have opened. Families will be singing in the fields. In their voices they will hear a music risen out of the ground. They will take nothing from the ground they will not return, whatever the grief at parting. Memory, native to this valley, will spread over it like a grove, and memory will grow into legend, and legend into song, song into sacrament. The abundance of this place, the songs of its people and its birds, will be health and wisdom and indwelling light. This is no paradisal dream. Its hardship is its possibility.
Been talking to Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson about her new book, What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures. Dr. Johnson, thank you so much for the lovely conversation and for your important and beautiful work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been a delight.
You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with Ayana Elizabeth Johnson on her new book, What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion, and the support of the John Templeton Foundation, whose vision is to become a global catalyst for discoveries that contribute to human flourishing. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carrie Harmon, Jason Sheasley, Audrey Griffith, and Tim Lauer. And special thanks to Wendell Berry for the use of his poem, A Vision. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.